Hello again, and welcome back to the series where we explore the supernatural, the unexplainable, and the flat-out strange phenomena that linger in our world. For centuries, whispers have told of infants born not entirely human, beings marked as omens, curses, or divine warnings. Long before the rise of modern medicine, the birth of a child with deformities was not seen as chance, but as prophecy. Tales of these so-called monstrous births have haunted the pages of history, strange infants hidden away, erased from records, or displayed as divine signs. Were these births messages from the beyond, or simply misunderstood tragedies born from fear? Across the ages, people have told stories of these so-called monstrous births. Cases where infants were born with unusual or unexplainable deformities that seemed to defy nature itself. Back in the before times, these births were often seen as warnings, punishments, or even supernatural interventions. Now, to be clear, this video is not meant to mock or disrespect anybody with medical conditions. Instead, we're exploring the public reaction, how fear, faith, and fascination shaped the way people once understood both the world around them and the human body itself. Mary Toft, England, 1726. Mary Toft was a poor woman who lived in the English town of Godalming in the year 1726. Soon, she would become the center of one of the strangest medical scandals in history. See, Mary claimed that she had been giving birth to not children, but rabbits. This rumor started with stories from neighbors claiming that they had seen pieces of animal flesh during one of her deliveries. Her husband rushed to tell the local surgeon, John Howard, who, curious and skeptical, decided to investigate. And to his astonishment, Howard claimed to have seen Mary give birth to various parts of rabbits, or at least what looked like leg, fur, even torsos of rabbits. Soon, word of this bizarre miracle started to spread beyond the village. Physicians from London arrived, including King George I's own surgeon, Nathaniel St. Andre. These doctors could not believe what they were seeing, yet somehow they did convince themselves that it was real. Reports described Toft in agonizing pain, while small animals were said to emerge from her body, a spectacle both horrifying and unthinkable. This story quickly captured the public imagination, and newspapers called her the Rabbit Woman of Godalming. Even the King of England took interest in this woman, and he ordered further investigation on these so-called miracle births. But as the scrutiny increased, the illusion began to crack. Doctors started to notice some inconsistencies with Mary's story. The fur began to look too clean, and the parts of the rabbit looked too fresh. Suspicion turned into scandal when somebody caught a porter trying to smuggle in a rabbit's body into Mary's room. Under the pressure of intense questioning, Mary finally cracked. She confessed that the entire affair was a hoax. She had been inserting pieces of dead rabbits inside of her to fake these births. But why would somebody do this? Many people believe in an act of desperation, maybe a poor woman's attempt to try to profit from fame, or even from sheer hysteria. After this, the medical community was completely humiliated. Respected surgeries in the time had been completely fooled by this lady. Pamphlets around the country had been mocking them mercilessly, turning the entire case into a national joke. Mary Toft was briefly imprisoned for fraud and then released, vanishing back into obscurity. But her story became a symbol of how superstition, ego, and curiosity can blind even the most rational minds. To this day, her tale is remembered as one of the most infamous examples of medical gullibility, a time where science and supernatural blended into one unforgettable legend. The Monster of Ravenna, Italy, 1512. The year was 1512 in the city of Ravenna, Italy, a time of political unrest, war, and religious tension. Reports began to surface of a child unlike any seen before. This infant had horns sprouting from its head, wings on its back, and a single leg ending in a talon. News of this monstrous birth spread quickly, reaching the ears of both townsfolk and scholars. Artists sketched the child in pamphlets, creating some of the earliest sensationalized news illustrations of monstrous births. To many, this was more than medical curiosity. This was a divine warning. People interpreted this birth as an omen of impending disaster, perhaps signaling war, plague, or political upheaval. Religious authorities declared the child a sign from God, punishment for human sin, or a prophecy of doom. Some people claimed that the child was conceived during the parents' sins, making it a punishment made of flesh. Scholars of the time debated its meaning, blending theology, astrology, and superstition. The pamphlets about the child circulated wide around Italy and even beyond into the rest of Europe. Each retelling of the story grew more elaborate. Additional limbs, strange features, grotesque expressions. The Monster of Ravenna became a cultural touchstone, a symbol of fear and fascination with the unknown. People began using this tale to scare, teach, and manipulate each other, using it to warn each other about moral decay or political danger. The child itself disappeared from records, leaving only the terrifying illustrations and written accounts behind. Modern historians believe that this case may have just been a congenital deformity, likely just a combination of a bunch of different physical anomalies. But in 1512, the line between nature and supernatural was very thin. The monster of Ravenna reminds us how the human imagination will fill the gaps, turning rare medical conditions into tales of wonder and warning. Artists, writers, and theologians, they continued to reference this monster for decades, and this cemented its place in European folklore. Its story is a perfect example of how fear, superstition, and storytelling intertwined in the pre-modern world. The Monstrous Child of Augsburg, Germany, 1579. In 1579, the city of Augsburg, Germany became the site of a story that would captivate and horrify the public. A pamphlet circulated describing a child born with extraordinary deformities, unusual limbs, a second face, and other inexplicable features. People were both fascinated and horrified by these accounts. Again, this monstrous child was interpreted as a divine sign from God, a warning of God's displeasure, or a consequence of the sins. Religious leaders seized upon the story, using it to warn the faithful about moral corruption. Some claim that the child's deformities were simply punishment from God for the parent's sin. This reflects the deeply moralistic viewpoint at the time. These pamphlets describing the birth were widely distributed, far beyond the city of Augsburg. Illustrations often exaggerated the deformities, creating a horrifying spectacle that fueled curiosity and fear. Townspeople flocked to see the child or hear firsthand accounts blending real events with rumor and legends. Scholars debated whether this was a miracle, a curse, or simply an anomaly. Some accounts suggested multiple other births with similar deformities, and this heightened the sense of omen and dread within the community. The child became a cautionary tale, a story repeated in sermons and moral tracts for decades to come. Stories of monstrous births like this were used to explain multiple things. Things like societal problems, natural disasters, and political unrest. And again, modern historians speculate that the child likely just had congenital malformations, and at the time, science and superstition were pretty much inseparable. This story really highlights the power of printed media at the time, and how fast sensational stories could spread in the 16th century. It became a way for society to process the unknown, creating a mix of horror, awe, and moral instruction. Even centuries later, the pamphlets and illustrations remain as a window into the human desire to make sense of the inexplicable. This tale reminds us that these births were not only medical curiosities, but they're also cultural mirrors. They reflect the fears and the beliefs of the current time period. The birth of two-headed children. During the 16th through 18th centuries, reports of two-headed children and conjoined twins captured the imagination of Europe. These births were always labeled as monstrous, even though they were natural but rare conditions. One child might have two fully formed heads, each with its own expression, yet sharing only one body. Others were joined at the chest or abdomen, sometimes sharing organs and sometimes not. Townsfolk and travelers, they would often flock to come and see these children. It would create a macabre form of entertainment for them. Some were displayed publicly, traveling with traveling fairs or in curiosity shows. Religious leaders and moralists frequently interpreted these births as warning signs from God. Again, people always believed that these births were punishments for parental sins or omens of disaster. More detailed illustrations and pamphlets would come out, spreading this story far and wide, always exaggerating the deformities or the effect of the deformity. These births were often documented alongside other wonders of nature, strange animals, unusual weather, and cosmic events. Some physicians attempted to explain the phenomena using limited medical knowledge at the time. Often, they would blend science and superstition. The presence of a two-headed child would always strike fear and awe into the community, and the families of these children would often be either shunned or revered, and this is based on the local beliefs or the superstition. In some of these cases, the children would go on to live long and fulfilling lives, but often their stories were lost in legend. Conjoined twins occasionally became subjects of early scientific curiosity, inspiring anatomical study. These births would challenge the assumptions about normality, humanity, and divine will. They became emblematic of society's struggle to reconcile the miraculous, the monstrous, and the medical. Over time, these stories contributed to early debates about human anatomy, even ethics and the line between miracle and anomaly. Even today, they remind us how fear and fascination will often walk hand in hand with each other, especially in our understanding of the unknown. The snake-born babies of China. This is ancient and medieval folklore. Back in the day in China, tales would circulate of babies born with serpentine features. Some would have small tails, and others are said to have scales and snake-like limbs. I didn't think that snakes had limbs. Whatever. These births were often recorded in local chronicles or passed down orally, becoming a part of regional folklore. And again, people would interpret these as omens or like a sign from the heavens. Some would even think that they're messages about dynastic changes, disasters, or cosmic imbalances. Some accounts even claim that the babies would be able to speak or exhibit some strange intelligence, which is obviously unusual for their age, being just born. Others speculated that these were portents of dragons, creatures that were long associated with power, luck, and the divine authority in Chinese culture. Families would often keep their children hidden in fear of social shame. In some cases, the emperors or the local rulers would actually summon the family to study the birth, seeking to understand the meaning of it. These snake-born babies were rarely seen as purely medical phenomena. Instead, they were often woven into moral or religious or even political narrative. Legends would even describe these babies as harbingers of change, a warning of the rise or the fall of rulers. Illustrators and storytellers would exaggerate the features over time, making these tales even more eerie and unforgettable. Folk medicine and religious leaders were often called to purify or bless the child to prevent a disaster happening. And sometimes the child's unusual features were interpreted as a sign of spiritual favor instead of only doom. These stories would reinforce the belief that the natural and supernatural worlds were deeply intertwined. Communities used the tales to explain famine, war, or social upheaval, linking rare births to even broader cosmic patterns. Luckily, writers documented these births in family records and local histories, ensuring that the stories would be endured for generations. And over time, these legends became part of the cultural memory, appearing in art, theater, and even folklore. Modern scholars view these tales as a mix of medical anomaly, myth, and moral storytelling, showing how the imagination will fill in the gaps of understanding. Witches in monstrous births. In Europe during the 1500s and 1600s, fear of witchcraft was at its peak. Women that were accused of witchcraft would often be blamed for the unnatural and monstrous births. Strange infants, born with deformities or unusual features, they were sometimes described as spawns of the devil. Communities whispered that these witches could give birth to malformed children that were either demons or animals. And these claims were often used to justify persecution and the execution of these women. Legal and religious authorities would often reinforce this idea that monstrous births were signs and evidence of witchcraft. Again, we gotta have some pamphlets with this. Pamphlets would circulate across Europe, spreading the terrifying accounts of witches and their unnatural offspring. Illustrations would often depict grotesque hybrid creatures, blending human and animal traits together. Midwives and local healers were sometimes accused of colluding with the witches to hide these births. In many cases, fear and rumor overtook reality. Healthy children could be reinterpreted as monsters. Clergy would use these stories to teach morality, warning communities of divine punishment or sin. Trials of these accused witches often featured testimony about monstrous births, and oftentimes they were completely fabricated to allow these people to torture innocent women. These stories reinforced social hierarchies, giving authority figures a tool to control behavior and belief. In some towns, sightings of these malformed infants sparked mass hysteria, with villagers believing that witch covens were still active nearby. Scientific understanding during this time was virtually non-existent, so any rare deformity was automatically interpreted as supernatural. Over time, stories of witches and monstrous births became legendary, immortalized in the literature and the folklore of the time. The fear of these births really reflects the society of the time, grappling with the unknown, the strange, and the terrifying. This shows how superstition can transform rare, natural occurrences into tools of terror and control. Let's get into these pamphlets. So between the 1500s and 1700s, Europe experienced a boom in printed media. Pamphlets and broadsides became the tabloids of the era, spreading the news, the gossip, and sensationalized media. And among some of the most popular topics were monstrous births. Stories of infants with deformities, animal traits, or extra limbs would sell copies and capture the public attention. These printers and writers would often exaggerate the facts, turning rare medical conditions into shocking tales. These pamphlets would travel from town to town, spreading fear, awe, and curiosity. Illustrations depicted grotesque features, horns, limbs, and hybrid creatures, all of this designed to shock the reader. These stories would mix science, superstition, and religion, making what's simply the unusual turn into the supernatural. Like we talked about, these pamphlets would claim that monstrous births were divine warnings, and others suggested that it was curses and witchcraft, with officials using them as moral lessons to warn against sin. Families of these affected children were sometimes vilified or exploited for profit. Even doctors and scholars would sometimes use these pamphlets to record observations, though obviously the accuracy of these were often secondary to the sensationalism. During this time, the line between truth and entertainment was very thin. Pamphlets would frame these children as symbols of divine displeasure or cosmic warnings. But despite the exaggeration, some accounts were actually based on real, rare medical anomalies. And obviously, they were misunderstood and turned into myth. Humanity has always desired to make sense of the unexplainable. The Elephant Man connection. In the late 19th century, the world encountered one of the most famous figures associated with physical deformities, Joseph Merrick, known to history as the Elephant Man. Merrick was born in Leicester, England in 1862, and he had severe medical deformities affecting his bones, skin, and facial features. As a child, he endured rejection, abuse, and isolation, reflecting society's fear of the unusual and unknown. But by adulthood, Merrick's condition had become so pronounced that he could no longer live at home, and he became a curiosity in traveling shows. People would flock to see him. They were fascinated by his appearance, calling him monstrous. Yet he was fully human. He was very intelligent and very sensitive. Doctors, including the famous Frederick Treves, studied Merrick, and they documented his condition for the first time in medical literature. Merrick's deformities were eventually believed to result from Proteus syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that causes overgrowth of skin, bones, and connective tissue. Joseph Merrick's life really highlights a shift from superstition to medical observation, really bridging the gap from the age of monstrous birth pamphlets to modern scientific curiosity. Unlike the pamphlets of earlier centuries that were exaggerated, Merrick's story was real, documented, and actually humanized. Yet public fascination would still blur empathy with spectacle. He became a symbol of human resilience in the face of fear and misunderstanding. Merrick spent much of his adult life at the London hospital, where he formed genuine friendships and was treated with dignity. He became a symbol of human resilience in the face of fear and misunderstanding by the public. The media coverage of Merrick's life often sensationalized his appearance, echoing the centuries-old fascination with monstrous births. Artists, writers, and filmmakers later dramatized his life, cementing the Elephant Man as a cultural icon of both horror and humanity. And we're reminded by his story that society has long been both fascinated and repelled by physical differences. His life does contrast to the earlier tales of monstrous births, where infants were feared or hidden or mythologized, showing us the transition from superstition to empathy and science. This story of Joseph Merrick closes the arc for us on monstrous births. Even today, the Elephant Man inspires discussions about ethics, compassion, and the intersection between human wonder and human dignity. From everything that we covered in this video, it's clear that these tales show us more about human curiosity, fear, and imagination than about the children themselves. Thankfully, we live in a time where the line between supernatural and natural isn't as blurred, and we actually have empathy for these people. And it's sad that at the time when these people were born, they were treated as a spectacle instead of as a person with feelings. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into monstrous births. I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and let me know what you guys thought about it in the comments below. If you liked the video and you want to show some support, please leave a like down below. And I would appreciate it if you thought about subscribing, because there will be more videos like this coming soon. Bye!